More than 2,500 years ago, a teacher in ancient China began developing ideas about morality, leadership, and social harmony that would eventually shape the lives of billions of people across centuries. His teachings influenced imperial governments, education systems, family traditions, and social values not only in China, but throughout East Asia. Emperors built state institutions around his philosophy. Scholars memorized and debated his writings for generations. And even today, his ideas continue to shape cultural values in societies across the world. That philosopher was Confucius. Yet what makes his story remarkable is not simply the influence of his teachings, but the fact that during his own lifetime, he never ruled a kingdom, commanded an army, or established a powerful school of political followers. In fact, many of the rulers he tried to advise ignored his ideas completely. Before we begin, if you enjoy deep historical documentaries about civilizations, philosophy, and global history, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. So how did a traveling teacher, born in a relatively small state during a period of political chaos, become one of the most influential thinkers in the history of civilization? To answer that question, we must first understand the world in which Confucius lived. Confucius was born in 551 BCE in the state of Lu, ancient state located in what is today eastern China. At the time, China was formerly ruled by the Zhou dynasty, a royal house that had once commanded vast authority across the Chinese world. However, by the 6th century BCE, the power of the Zhou kings had significantly declined. Regional lords and aristocratic families had gained increasing autonomy, and many effectively ruled their territories as independent states. This era, known as the Spring and Autumn period, was marked by constant political rivalry, shifting alliances, and frequent warfare between competing states. As the traditional political order weakened, Chinese intellectual life entered a period often described as the 100 schools of thought, when philosophers and scholars proposed different ideas about how society should be organized and governed. Some thinkers emphasized strict legal codes and centralized authority. Others promoted withdrawal from politics and a return to harmony with nature. But Confucius developed a different approach, one centered on ethics, education, and moral responsibility. The central problem that Confucius attempted to solve was simple yet profound. How can a society maintain stability and harmony during times of political disorder? Instead of focusing primarily on laws or military strength, Confucius believed that the answer lay in the moral character of individuals, especially those who held positions of authority. He argued that social order begins with ethical behavior. When leaders act with integrity, wisdom, and compassion, their example naturally encourages the people to behave in similar ways. In other words, a well-governed society is not created primarily through punishment or coercion, but through the cultivation of virtue. This idea placed enormous importance on personal responsibility and self-discipline, particularly among rulers and officials. The philosophy that developed from these ideas later became known as Confucianism. At its center were several key concepts that defined how individuals should behave within society. One of the most important was Ren, often translated as humaneness, compassion, or benevolence. Ren represented the ideal moral quality that individuals should strive to develop in their relationships with others. Another key concept was Li, which referred to proper conduct, rituals, social customs, and respectful behavior. Li provided the framework for how individuals should interact within families, communities, and political institutions. Together, Ren and Li created a vision of society based on ethical behavior and mutual respect. For Confucius, these values were not abstract philosophical principles, but practical guidelines for everyday life. One of the most distinctive features of Confucian philosophy is its emphasis on the importance of relationships. Confucius believed that individuals exist within networks of social responsibilities that shape their duties and obligations. At the center of these relationships is the family. The concept of filial piety, or respect and devotion toward one's parents and ancestors, became one of the core pillars of Confucian thought. Children were expected to honor their parents, care for them in old age, and maintain family traditions. Confucius argued that when families practice respect, loyalty, and responsibility. These values would naturally extend into society as a whole. Just as children respected parents, subjects should respect rulers, and rulers should care for their people with wisdom and fairness. In this way, Confucian philosophy linked family ethics directly to political governance. Despite the strength of his ideas, Confucius struggled to gain influence in political courts. He spent many years traveling between different states, hoping that rulers would adopt his philosophy of moral governance. Although he occasionally held minor government positions, most rulers were more interested in military strategies and political competition than in ethical reform. As a result, Confucius increasingly focused on teaching. He gathered a group of students who studied history, poetry, ritual traditions, and ethical philosophy under his guidance. These students carefully preserved many of his sayings and conversations, which were later compiled into a collection known as the Analects. The Analects became one of the most important philosophical texts in East Asian intellectual history. Although Confucius did not achieve widespread political success during his lifetime, his ideas gained enormous influence in later centuries. During the Han Dynasty, Chinese rulers sought a philosophy that could provide a stable foundation for governing a vast empire. Confucian thought offered exactly what they needed: a system that emphasized loyalty, moral leadership, and respect for hierarchy. As a result, Confucianism became the ideological foundation of the imperial state. Government officials were required to study Confucian classics, and the civil service examination system tested candidates on their knowledge of these texts. For nearly 2,000 years, this system shaped Chinese education, administration, and political culture. Confucian ideas also spread beyond China, influencing societies in Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. Few philosophical traditions have had such a long-lasting influence on governance and social values. Even in the modern world, the teachings of Confucius continue to influence discussions about leadership, education, and social responsibility. His emphasis on moral leadership remains relevant in debates about political ethics and good governance. His focus on education and self-improvement continues to shape cultural attitudes toward learning and scholarship. And his belief that stable societies depend on responsible relationships between individuals still resonates in discussions about community and social harmony. Although the political systems of modern nations differ greatly from those of ancient China, the questions Confucius explored about morality, leadership, and human responsibility remain timeless. Confucius lived during a time of political fragmentation and social uncertainty. Rather than advocating conquest or domination, he proposed a vision of society based on ethical leadership, education, and respect for human relationships. Over the centuries, his ideas became deeply embedded in the cultural and political foundations of East Asian civilization. The institutions of imperial China, the traditions of family life, and the intellectual culture of East Asia all carried the imprint of his teachings. Even today, the legacy of Confucius reminds us that the most enduring influence in history does not always come from armies or rulers. Sometimes it comes from a teacher and the ideas that continue to shape how societies understand morality, leadership, and the responsibilities of human life.